Hi guys, TheHande here. So I was actually planning on making one more Finland stuff video before I would finally talk about the upcoming Finnish parliamentary election, but unfortunately I couldn't find the video that I was going to react to, so I guess we're doing this then. I mean, it is getting pretty close. The Finnish parliamentary elections are going to be held early in April, and I have been sort of teasing what are some of the big issues that people are going to be talking about in the elections in my previous video about this topic, where I had an overview of Sanna Marin's government. And I have to say, I don't really have any supreme insight into the election as such in regards to speculation about who's going to win, because I think it's pretty obvious who is going to win the election. If you look at any opinion polls from the past year, it is becoming increasingly obvious that the NCP will most likely win this oncoming election. And there's really two major reasons for this. Number one is obviously that they've been in the opposition for such a long time, and inevitably at the end of any government's time in power, their popularity tends to kind of dip. So whoever was the most boisterous party in the opposition usually has a really good chance of maybe getting into power in the next election. But also NCP just has a lot of momentum behind it, having basically been the big winner in the last two elections that we've had. One of which I made a video about a couple of years ago, which was the Finnish municipal elections, and we even had another election in the meanwhile, which was the Finnish healthcare area election. So the big question about what's going to happen in the elections really doesn't revolve around who's going to win, but rather who exactly is NCP going to even form a government with? Because if this is the first time you're watching one of these Leaders of Finland videos, and you didn't see my introductory crash course into Finnish politics, one-party majority governments are not really a thing in Finland. In Finland, governments are always formed from a coalition of at least at minimum 3 parties. And in recent years, more and more increasingly, there are more parties. A good example is our previous government, which had 5 parties in it. Now, I know I started this video basically declaring NCP the winners from the get-go, but one thing that is also interesting about those opinion polls, if you look at the party currently leading the government, the SDP, they are not shockingly as low in the polls as you might think. On the contrary, they are still very close to the top, but they are now very neck and neck with the Finns party, who also seem to be on the rise. And if we are to look at those same polls and we are looking for the biggest loser in the bunch, that one right now is obviously the Center Party. Now, why is the SDP still so popular, despite having been in power for the past 4 years? Now, I do think a lot of that actually does have to do with Sanna Marin. And I think, unfortunately, what is going on right now is that this is also emblematic of how politics has become very divisive in Finland. That is to say, while Sanna Marin's policies are not popular with everybody, she does have a very loyal following. And what has basically started to happen is, of course, that the people who like Sanna Marin seem to really, really like her, and the people who don't like her really openly despise her. So despite the fact that the cost of living and the concerns about Finland's electricity situation were something that people were talking quite a lot about in the autumn, this winter has luckily not gone as badly as everybody was fearing. So that also might be part of the reason why Sanna Marin has been able to maintain her popularity a little bit as well. Conversely, one of their partner parties, the Center Party, has really dropped down in the approval ratings. At one point, they were even tracking behind the Greens and the Left Alliance, and I don't think this is much of a surprise. The last few months of the Sanna Marin government's life have been filled with a lot of internal conflict, especially between the SDP and the Center Party, whom I mentioned already were the first ones to start arguing with the lead party already back in 2021. And as the election has gotten closer, their differences in opinions seem to have become more and more pronounced. However, I have also mentioned before that polls can be slightly fickle things and they don't always tell the full truth. Because the Center Party has traditionally had such a huge support amongst Finnish voters, I have a hard time believing that the center party has lost that much traction, but at the same time I can understand where the poll numbers are coming from. When you are constantly being depicted as the guy who doesn't play well with others, I can understand that people answering this poll are maybe not too keen to tell that they're center party voters. But maybe the polls are accurate and the center party is headed for their worst result ever in the parliamentary elections. Who knows? The point that I'm getting at, however, is that the clear top three right now is the NCP, SDP, and the Finns party, and this does beg a lot of questions about who exactly is going to form a government. Now, I do still think the NCP has a much better chance of winning, so it therefore looks like the NCP is most likely going to have to form a government with the Finns party. In the autumn, however, political experts were actually discounting this possibility. In the last couple of years, the Finnish party has really doubled down on its two outstanding values, which is its anti-EU and anti-immigration policies, which clashes pretty hard with the NCP, which is a very pro-EU and very pro-immigration sort of party. Some political experts were actually going so far that the NCP and the Finnish party were so diametrically opposed to each other that the NCP's only option would basically be to form a government with the SDP, which I know sounds crazy bananas, considering that one is a right and one a left-leaning party. But there of course is a precedent for this, because in the 90s we did in fact have two NCP-SDP governments. However, the political climate was very different back then, and there were other reasons why those two parties decided to form a government together. And indeed, after the New Year's, the NCP has become a lot more conciliating in its stances because they want to keep their options open to the Finns party as well. Because historical precedence has also shown that the Finns party are not above just staying out of the government even when they have a very good election result. But it's difficult to see that there would actually be any other options there because, like I said, the center party doesn't look too hot right now, which means that even if the NCP was to form a government with them, they would then have to inevitably ask a bunch of the other smaller parties to join them in the government. And even then, they might only get a slight majority. Now, I hear some of you wonder, well, the short answer is no, and the long answer is no. Minority governments in Finnish politics are just not really a thing. Except, of course, we have heard one interesting bit of news from Sanna Marin. Sanna Marin has made it clear that if the SDP was to win the election, they would actually be perfectly happy to form a single-party minority government temporarily until Finland's NATO membership has been formally finalized. However, I see this kind of a government formation being such a long shot that I honestly don't think it would be very practical, even though all the Finnish parties are pretty much in favor of just pushing the NATO membership through at this point. The big problem that I would see with that is that if the process gets dragged out even further, I think it would just make Finland's own internal political situation too unstable. So I'd have a hard time believing that that kind of a government could last very long. And of course, the main reason why a minority government in Finnish politics rarely works out is that that government would very quickly find itself voted out of power. And like I said, I don't personally believe that an SDP-NCP government would necessarily be a good idea either, because there I do believe that the parties are too diametrically opposed to each other for that kind of a government to be sustainable for any serious length of time. So for better or for worse, it does seem that we are kind of headed towards a possible NCP-Finns party coalition, and if that is to happen, I do have a sneaking suspicion that we are going to see a lot more of internal squabbling going on in politics, which I'm not happy about, but I don't really see any other realistic option. Now, because the NCP is leading the polls, the reason behind that is, of course, that they have promised to lock down on Finland's public spending, which has gone up significantly under Sanna Marin. And while they are making a lot of promises about that, there are two big issues that the NCP is still going to have to find a lot of money for. And even more so than who they're going to end up in the government with is the number one thing that I'm mostly concerned about. Number one, of course, Finland's looming NATO membership means that Finland is now increasing its military spending for the first time in decades. Seriously, since the end of the Cold War, Finland has basically just been reducing military spending each year. And now that that trend has gone in the opposite direction, A big question, of course, is where's the money going to come from? Other topical issue that Finland is dealing with is that right now and also last spring there were a lot of strikes, and particularly there were strikes in Finnish healthcare services. Now last year, those talks luckily led to an end to the labor fight, but public healthcare spending is still one of the burning issues in Finnish politics, and it's not something that can be solved by cutting costs. And even more so, a big problem is, of course, where are we going to get more people to work in our healthcare sector? And this is one of those things where the NCP and the Finns party are completely at odds as what the correct solution is, since the NCP believes in increasing work-based immigration, while the Finns party believes in the opposite. So I said while who is going to form the government is the biggest issue here, in a weird way, even that is kind of secondary, because regardless of who's in power, there's going to be a lot of big problems that they're going to have to solve, and the solutions may not be very easy. As far as the government formation side of this video, the main thing that I really hope is that there will be some swift decision about that, and that we do not end up in the same kind of situation as Sweden has ended up in the last couple of years. So sorry for ending the video on a bit of a heavy note there at the end, but yes, these are heavy decisions to be made. And of course, as always, if there happens to be any Finns watching this video, I heavily implore you to then go cast your votes, whoever the party is that you decide to vote for, because those votes do matter. Even if it's the small parties, even if it's the big parties, sometimes political decisions can rely on a very small margin of votes. So your vote, it does matter. I'm TheHande. See you on the next one.